you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and a really warm welcome to the Children and Young People Scrutiny panel of Kirklees Council, meeting on Thursday, the 14th of July at 2 p.m. And this is obviously a virtual meeting. Just apologies if anybody's watching us or listening to us on the live stream because of the snow conditions in West Yorkshire. One or two staff are working from different places and there might be one or two unusual technical difficulties. So if the live stream drops out, we apologise for that. But just also remember that this meeting is being recorded for archive purposes. And if there's a particular item you want to look at later on, you will be able to do that from the Kirklees Council website. So just moving on to the agenda. So the first item is membership of the committee. Just a reminder that Paul Davis, who was a former member of this committee, is now a cabinet member, and so there is a vacancy. We're seeking replacement for Paul on the committee. I think at the last meeting we just expressed our thanks to Paul for the contribution that he's made and wish him well in his new role. I'm going to ask members of the committee to introduce themselves and briefly, and then officers, if you could introduce yourselves when it comes to you speaking on a particular item. So I'm Andrew Marchington, I'm a Kirklees councillor and I'm chair of this particular panel. Richard, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Richard Smith, ward councillor for Kirklees and panel member.
Paul.
You're on mute, Paul.
I've pressed the button. Sorry, I'm Paul White, councillor for Home Valley North Ward in Kirklees.
And Linda.
I'm Linda Summers. I'm a statutory co-optee on the panel.
Yeah, thank you. And we've received apologies from Councillor Yusra Hussain and Dale O'Neill, who's one of our statutory co-optees, has been trying to join the meeting, but fortunately there's been some technical difficulties there. So thank you for membership. Minutes of the previous meeting, agenda item 2. Panel members, can we approve those as an accurate record of that meeting? Is that fine? Thank you. And I think any matters arising will be dealt with during the meeting or have been dealt with outside the meeting. Panel members, have you got an interest to declare on any of the items? No, that's fine. Item 4, obviously this is a meeting that is held in public and there's no items on the agenda which will require us to move into private session. If anything does crop up, we'll move the appropriate resolutions and let you know about that. Helen, have we received any deputations or petitions?
No, we haven't, Chair.
And have we received any public questions from members of the public?
No, we haven't.
Thank you. Right. So we're now going to move on to item number 7, which is our regular item on looking at the number and age of children in care. And Elaine, can you lead on that item, please?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elaine McShane. I'm the Service Director of Family Support and Child Protection. So just starting at the outset of the report with the summary, you'll see the first graph shows a number of children in local authority care being 688, and that's excluded any looked after child receiving only short breaks and our unaccompanied asylum seeking children. Our current population rate is 68.6, that's per 100,000. That's actually 28% below our statistical neighbours, but in line with the England average. Apologies for that. The second graph shows the breakdown by age and gender of children in care. You'll see that for most part, for the 10 to 15-year-olds, that actually it's very similar for girls and boys, slightly more at the age of 16 and over. So in overall, more young boys in our care than girls. What I'd point out at this point, if you look at the children, the less than 1 year and the 1 to 4 years, it's unlikely that these children would remain in our care long term. This group of children are likely to be in care proceedings and the outcome of that may be a return to their parents' care, a place with extended family, or place for adoption. And that might be the same for some of a small number in the 5 to 9 years of age. It's usually a little more difficult to adopt children post 5, but where we've got sibling groups, we do aim to achieve that. The next table sets out who our statistical neighbours are in terms of who we make comparisons against. Demonstrates the ethnic breakdown of children looked after at the end of November 20. There has been very little change, I would say, between November and now. I would say in terms of our numbers overall, they've remained static. If you go back to the first graph, we did have an increase round about May and June of last year. June latterly up to 689, that's remained stable. In this month, I've looked at the figures today and we're at 684, so we've never really gone above that level, so things have stabled out, and that's very positive in terms of ensuring that children have remain within their families during this very difficult period, families or extended families. So looking at ethnicity, you would see that predominantly our children looked after are white, with the next largest group being dual heritage, which is about 50% less than the white population. And some much smaller numbers in other categories. The next area for our children placed more than 20 miles outside of Kirklees. These children are predominantly placed in foster placements, and it is 20 miles plus from their home address. They might just be over the border. So if you think about the geography of Kirklees and where children live and the expanse, it can just be over the border. Barnsley, Wakefield, Colerdale, some, just so not at great different distances. And we have had a big decline in actually placing children beyond 20 miles. We do try to keep them locally. If that's not with our own carers, we look to local carers first and foremost, even if they're from an independent fostering agency. And any child or young person placed beyond 20 miles needs my authorisation. What we place at the centre of our decision and making as well is where we can maintain their education provision, recognising that as a support network for a lot of children, that's really important. That's not just about the education, it's a socialisation on the emotional support that an education setting can set. So that's why when I'm looking at any placement, we ensure that we have a look at the education and how we can maintain that. Really, really important to consistency for the children. In terms of our, I've been looking at our children in external children's homes, and over the last 18 months, 2 years, we've reduced our children in external children's homes from 53 down to 22. So that's more than 50% reduction. We see that as a very, very positive, because again, we want to actually keep our children close to home. And even if they're not living with their families, close to their extended families, because that contact's important. So you'll see that actually we're reducing gradually as well our numbers. So it was in September 84. In November it was 80. I can say that that's now at 77. So we've had a further decrease because we've actually brought 3 young people closer to home as well. We do have young people in semi-independent accommodation. We do this, work very closely with our semi-independent accommodation providers, and there are 33 young people accommodated in that type of provision, 19 within our area, with 14 of our young people placed outside of Kirklees. Again, we work with young people. Some of those placed outside of Kirklees may be where they've been in a provision, in a placement for some significant time, and they want to remain close to that placement. So we make those decisions alongside young people. When they get to 16, 18, we don't necessarily bring them back to Kirklees, we talk about what their support networks are and look at provision in the local area with appropriate support. So they're the key highlights. I'm happy to take any questions if people have any.
Thank you, Elaine. Question. Thank you. Panel members, questions or comments? Linda?
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. Can I just pick up something on the last part of the report that you just finished on there, really? The children living in semi-independent accommodation outside of Kirklees. And I don't know if I'm reading it right, but there's 14 and 10 of them are on a Section 20 placement. So the majority of these would appear to be, my understanding, but I'm almost certainly got this wrong, but is that Section 20 placements are relatively short term?
Shall I give an explanation? Right.
So is there a way of us understanding the duration of this and how long? And I know you talked about some will go into this accommodation because they've been in the area for a long time, but is there a way of us understanding the duration of them living in this type of accommodation, really?
Right. What a number of these young people will have presented as is some young people that present to housing as homeless. We do a Merton assessment that actually looks at whether they need Section 20 or can they live independently without any local authority support. We have a conversation with the young person about what Section 20 means. They can sign that on their behalf at 16, 17. And so I would suggest, and I could have a look at the group and bring back further information, I would say that on the whole, these are young people that have come into local authority accommodation later on in their life, between 16 and 18. That may be why they're not in foster placements, because they don't want to be looked after in that way. So we'll look at semi-independent accommodation for once they're accommodated, that will last until they're 18, and then we'll look at their post-18 provision, because they will have care leaver status. The Section 20 is because you can't seek care orders beyond 16.
Right.
Unless you use a special jurisdiction of the court. So they'll have been presented on the whole as homeless or real concerns that we have about the care that they're receiving. So they'll have that for the length of the time that they need it.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Elaine. Yeah, any other questions, panel members? No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Elaine. I mean, I think it is good news that we've not seen sort of a big increase in children and young people being taken into care, particularly during the crisis. Just hope, and I understand some of the work we've been doing to try and make sure that families get the right support they need to do that. And I think if there is any increased pressure, or we feel that we're not getting to find out things we need to do, it'd be good to know about that and to report that back to the panel. But thank you, Elaine, and thank you for the work that's been going on in this particular area of the work with children and young people. Thank you. Okay, right, you're welcome. Right, we'll move on to item 8, emotional wellbeing of students, and I think Joanne is going to be leading on that item for us. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Joanne Sanders. I'm Service Director for Learning and Early Support. So I wanted to this afternoon to give you an update following a request at the last panel about the support that we've been putting in place alongside our schools and settings for youngsters as they return to school. So obviously, we know that schools are critical in helping prevent mental health problems escalating for our children and young people, in building well-being and resilience, and helping young people learn the skills they need to cope in the world. Our educational psychology team have been working to offer some targeted support for our schools so that they are able to support our youngsters throughout the pandemic, so that we've got some confidence and competent support for children and young people's emotional health and well-being on the return to education and actually moving forwards as well. So just in terms of giving an overview in terms of some key pieces of work then. Right back, if you go right back to May 2020, it feels like a long time ago, but it isn't really. At that time, we'd been in a national lockdown, and we were talking and preparing for the transition and return to school for some of our youngsters, and then more widely in the autumn term. So our educational psychology team developed some guidance, and this was provided to all our schools in May. And that was very much about thinking about and preparing for the support for emotional health and well-being. We also provided some guidance on supporting staff well-being. That was developed and circulated towards all our schools in May, because we know that school staff can only support children and young people effectively if we're looking after and supporting their well-being needs. So that was a really key and important, and it complemented the very strong offer that we have in Kirklees as part of our employee healthcare offer. The thing that was quite significant and was developed was later on in the year, a training package on emotion coaching. This was developed and sent to all schools prior to the return to education in September, particularly as well to support with transition. And this resource includes a range of lesson plans and some direct resources that children can participate in, and that's to support them understand the emotions they may be feeling and support them with managing those feelings and regulating them. This resource continues to be used by schools, and it's ignited a huge interest because of the principles of emotion coaching and the approaches that underpin. So this is research based, and it's being followed up with further training for key staff. This is something that we've developed, and it's now nationally available, and it's being promoted through Emotion Coaching UK. So we've been able locally to have a positive impact on our youngsters, but also that's being developed for much wider use. The government provided an initiative and a grant. In Kirklees, we received £63,309 to support the wellbeing for education return in September. And just we had our lead educational psychologist work with our public health colleagues on developing the best use of this grant. And what's been undertaken to date is there's been a programme of delivery to all schools around wellbeing and resilience that began in November, and the delivery is planned right the way through to March 2021. There's been some support to Kirklees College, developing mental health champions across pastoral and curriculum teams with access to wellbeing for education training, and the provision of a range of help for college staff around the support for young people's social, emotional and mental health needs. We are also currently developing guidance for schools on emotionally based school avoidance in readiness for post-February half term, accompanied by some training for key staff in how best to respond to children and young people who are anxious about school. Obviously, we're now again in another lockdown position. In addition to this, there's been some training opportunities provided for our school governors on understanding the importance of good mental health in schools and the role that adults in schools play in this, so that they can give some real consideration about how their policies and procedures can promote and underpin good mental health for pupils but staff as well. In relation to youngsters with special educational needs and disabilities, there have been some additional support for our SENCOs, our special educational needs coordinators, offering them some additional opportunities for supervision and support via the schools additional needs partnership. Something else that we've been participating on is the Alex Timpson programme on attachment and trauma-informed practice. And this is underpinned by research that's led by Oxford University. To date, this has been delivered with 8 of our schools, but more schools are participating from this term. And this is focused whole school development work, which aims to raise school staff awareness and increase understanding of the role of attachment and trauma in children's education, and provide strategies to better address their needs. It attempts to reduce exclusions from school, improve attendance, improve educational progress and the well-being of children who are vulnerable, and develop the confidence and skills of teachers and other school staff to identify the most effective approaches to address attachment and trauma in schools, build a strong national evidence base for schools and national policymakers to draw upon in making decisions and allocating resources. And I know we've had some really positive feedback from the schools that have been involved in that first wave. Colleagues may know, in Kirklees we've been part of a national initiative, so the mental health trailblazing programme. This is a national initiative that is being rolled out to local areas that were successful in applying for funding. We were successful in two bidding rounds, and that's resulted in around 80 Kirklees schools, so almost 50%, having access to additional support from specialists to deliver evidence-based interventions for children and young people with mild to moderate mental health needs, give timely advice to school staff, liaise with external specialist services to help children and young people to get the right support, and support schools to develop their whole school approach to emotional and mental health understanding. The team has adapted to remote delivery, so we've not let the fact that obviously the pandemic has provided some challenge, but wherever possible, this is continuing with schools so they can access that support for the children and young people where there are concerns. So that they've been able to access a comprehensive training and development offer to build capacity and to enable us to capitalise upon strong relationships that exist between children and school staff. Just then, in terms of how has it impacted, how has this affected people? We think that school leaders are better supported with transition planning for children and support for staff wellbeing. We feel that school staff are better equipped to respond effectively to children's emotional and mental health needs at an earlier stage, with a view to helping prevent needs arising. Children and young people reported by school staff to be well settled following the return to education, and children and young people receiving appropriate support from the people who know them best, so the familiar adults in school. Obviously, some of the challenges with COVID, it's really important that we don't underestimate what our schools have been undertaking to support a positive return to school. The culture and ethos of a school are really key determinants in promoting emotional well-being and mental health. And core values, attitudes and beliefs centred within the school context ensures that children and young people feel connected, accepted, respected and supported, and that they belong. If we truly want to make an impact across the area, we need to consider then moving forwards how best we manage funding. So we need to be able to sustain and widen the opportunities that we've put in place. And make sure we've got that equitable offer for all schools and education settings across Kirklees. I think the other thing, and Tom may wish to contribute to this, I think we've explained to Scrutiny panel before that we undertook a children and young people survey earlier on in the pandemic, so I think it was around May or June time. Well, an additional children and young people survey was undertaken in December in conjunction with our public health colleagues, and the results of which are just about to be analysed. But that's going to be really, really important in terms of moving forwards. So that's a summary, I suppose, of our support. I think our schools have absolutely been very proactive. I think we understand working with our early support colleagues, with our health colleagues, and also with ward counsellors to try and make additional resource available where possible to support the mental health and wellbeing of our youngsters. But that's an overview as things currently stand. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne, for that. Oh, getting a bit of feedback. Thank you for that. Yeah, comprehensive update. Panel members, questions, comments? Richard, you got a hand shown?
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, mental health amongst kids is vitally important. So I'm pleased to hear you mention that. What I'm a little bit concerned about is a couple of things, really. Firstly, there seems to be a lot of schools I speak to reporting somewhere between 40 and 50% attendance amongst children at school at the moment, which leads me to believe that some of the parents self-identifying as critical workers are not necessarily understanding the rules or not necessarily being completely honest about it. I cannot see that half of the schools, or almost half the kids, are in families where parents are working in critical, and I mean critical jobs. I don't mean people that might happen to work for somebody like the NHS or maybe a pharmaceutical company. Are they actually doing something within those organisations that is critical? Because if they're not, then that's not in the spirit of the rules. So that's one thing that I've noticed through various discussions and personal experience. And the other thing as well, today many schools are closed again. So there are a lot of kids off school today. Critical workers can't do the work because they've got kids running around the house. And there can only be two reasons for this. The first one is either schools are closed unnecessarily, prematurely, being too cautious, or Kirklees hasn't been proactive in preparing the roads to allow them to open. So that's a little bit disappointing as well. But going back to the point, I mean, kids are struggling. There is no doubt about it. They can't see the friends. Most of them can't see the grandparents. And I know that most of this stuff is outside the gift of anybody on this call to resolve. But we do need to think about how, I know that teachers are under stress, but they're adults. Most of the time they go home to the normal households, if they go out of the house anyway. The kids are the ones that are struggling. The kids are the ones that need support, and this is the Children's Scrutiny Panel after all. That's my point.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Sorry, you did me, Paul. Sure. You want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I wanted to thank John for that report because it was clearly very comprehensive, and there's been lots of fantastic work going on in Kirklees to support children in school settings and staff. The question initially was going to be about the emotional wellbeing support for staff, and you've touched on that, even though the topic was about students, wasn't it? I think just in terms of feedback from the schools that I've been in contact with, they've been very pleased by the support from Kirklees and the centre, especially early on in the term in terms of dealing with children returning. So there's been some very good feedback from the schools, so thanks for that. In terms of feedback, in terms of the primary schools in the area that I'm involved with, they've found that the return has been really good, and children clearly are very resilient. So the issues and problems that they were perhaps expecting weren't as bad. There was clearly a handful of children in the school that I'm chair of governors of that were struggling, but it was very much a handful out of 400 and odd children and students, and they've been able to get support for those children. I suppose my concern and question has been about the support for staff, and maybe there's not an awful lot that can be done, but they clearly have been under huge pressures in terms of workload, and that has started to take a toll. There's no doubt on certain staff, and in particular school leaders. And I was going to ask a question about, the support in particular for school leaders at this time, because what I'm seeing is them being very overworked and very stressed, working very, very long hours and starting to get extremely tired and worn out by it all. And maybe there's not an awful lot we can do. We just have to sort of plough our way through it, and eventually it'll come to an end. But that's really my question. What support is there in particular for school leaders?
Thanks, Paul, for that question. Joanne, support for school leaders?
Thank you, Councillor White. I think you made a very pertinent point, and I think school leaders have been under an awful lot of pressure, and so part of in my update, working with our school governors is really important, because the governing body have a role in supporting their school leaders, but I think it's been incredibly pressured. There's been an awful lot of guidance. They've had to lead their staff teams. It's been a very changeable picture. It's been very interesting over the Christmas period. We were all gearing up for one thing, and then something else happened, and I feel really proud of our school leaders. It is exceptionally challenging, and I think they really value the support that they've been getting from governors, from each other. So one of the areas where school leaders can get some support is from each other. So peer support's really important, and we know that we've got really strong secondary heads, special school heads, primary school heads networks. One of the things that we've tried to do with all our schools is check in with them. It's not a one size fits all. There have been some particular challenges, and we've wrapped support around that, either on a one-to-one or as part of a team. I think it has been very much a Team Kirklees approach, whether that's through an emergency planning situation, an infection prevention control situation. Sometimes it might be from a learning support or a financial support, but we've really wrapped the team around the head and the school. I think the other thing to say, one of the things that we did make available to any head teacher, and absolutely it's for them to access or not when the time is right for them, is some free coaching. So coaching to support leaders is something I personally have found very valuable as a leader, and we've been able to put that offer and make that available to our heads. And I suppose finally to say, we do have a head teacher wellbeing service. It's something we're very proud of in Kirklees. We always encourage our governors to make sure that head teachers are aware of this. And I know that our colleagues who deliver that service it's been very busy in sort of listening, supporting, etc. So you're absolutely right. It's been a challenge, but and if there are some suggestions about anything more we can do, of course we'd welcome that. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks, Paul. That's really good to hear of that support going on and the support that can be offered. Linda.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joanne, for the report. It was very useful. Can I just ask you, and it's something that only emerged to me as an issue yesterday from a very different part of the country, so I'm not suggesting I'm aware it's an issue here, but it's significant if it is, of a small but worrying number of children who never came back to school after schools returned, and who were the most vulnerable in terms of their emotional well-being. Do we track, and are we aware of any evidence of children who've dropped off the radar effectively?
Thank you for your question, Linda. We absolutely track all youngsters. We do this before COVID, during COVID, it'll be there after COVID. We've got really robust systems, and we've got a children missing education team. So absolutely, we'll be expecting youngsters to turn up to school where they've been allocated a school place. But for many reasons, sometimes that doesn't happen. Maybe the youngsters moved out of the area. Maybe there's been a decision to electively home educate. Either which way, there's some really robust processes in place between us and our educational settings. And then where the school does try and follow up in the first instance, where that's not the case, then our CME team are out, and they robustly follow that up, because absolutely we need to make sure that we can, in the nicest possible way, account for every youngster, so that they are safe predominantly. That's our first and utmost concern, but also that they're receiving the education they're entitled to. So yes, I'd hope you could be reassured by that.
Thank you, that is reassuring, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Linda, for that question, and Joe for that response. Yeah, I've got a few. So it's really good to hear about the training packages. I'm really excited about the emotional coaching. You just feel there's going to be some really good long-term benefits come from that. We've got immediate problems at the moment, but actually that could be really good. And I think you've probably partially answered this in your response to Paul's question, but I'm assuming that's across the across all the phases, you know, early years through to Key Stage 4. And is it tailored particularly for the needs of children of different ages?
Could I clarify, Councillor Marchington, is what tailored across the different ages?
You're talking about the training package for emotional coaching?
It is tailored to the stage, not just the age of youngsters. So some of this is research based. So yes.
Yeah, that's really good. Just to coordinate, so the schools are accessing, you're saying that schools have accessed some additional funding for additional funding support. Is that sort of complement what's available to them from Kirklees as well? So that's the 80 schools.
It's not additional funding. Basically, right. It's us as a council. We put in a funding bid, and right. That's enabled us to work positively then with those schools. So yes, we identified groups of schools that complements the work that our schools are doing in community hubs.
Yeah, good. Okay, and then the remote delivery of stuff. I know most of what we're having to do, but not all is remote at the moment. Do you think there's some things you might want to continue doing in the future? So if I mean, again, linking in what the question that Paul had about support for senior leaders. So if a head teacher needs immediate support, you could have a Teams meeting or a Skype call or something. You can do some face-to-face stuff in respect to that, which might work well in the future, not just during the current pandemic.
I think there's a huge range of opportunities. There are challenges, aren't there, working in this way, but there are also huge opportunities. One of the things, because myself, Mel, Elaine and colleagues, we've been meeting weekly, at least with our school leaders. We've been able to hold webinars, and what we've seen is Really good participation. These have been led by Councillor Patterson as lead member, because I suppose we're not trying to bring people from across the authority into a room. So it's something absolutely that enables maybe greater participation. Some things I absolutely wish we could do face to face, because sometimes there are things that just work better face to face. But I think one of the key opportunities we do have, and we need to harness, is the remote learning. As we move forward, some of the challenges like really bad weather like we have today, actually maybe snow days in the past were no learning days. Snow days maybe in the future will be remote learning days. So some of that creates greater opportunities, which of course we want to think about moving forwards. So
yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, although that creates some logistical problems as well. I know that my wife's school today, that you have to be able to get into school to deliver some of the remote. Depends what you've planned and set up to do, doesn't it? So I think they're up and running tomorrow with that if children can't get in. That's great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the emotional wellbeing report? That's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. And it's really good to hear the work that's going on there, and we hope the good work continues. Okay. Right, item 9 then. I think it's you again, Joanne. It's the COVID catch-up fund.
thank you. Okay, so there'll be 2 strands to my update. I'll start with what that's meant in terms of actual finance across Kirklees to date, and then I will just share with you what we know thus far and what we'll be doing moving forwards in terms of tracking that support. So just to remind colleagues, so the government announced that it's for the academic year 2020-21, so September to August, that they would be supporting all schools with £80 per pupil, and that was for reception year right through to year 11, with an additional premium to support catch-up funding. For special schools and pupil referral units, they were entitled to £240 per pupil. Just to give you an idea of the scale of that, across the year that will represent roundabout, and it is roundabout because obviously our numbers are changing, and it works on that allocation works on our school census, but that will equate to round about £5 million. So the first grant that has been received, we've had across the authority £1.3 million. So we are expecting, since the October census took place in October, that will be the basis on which the next allocation of funding will be passported out to schools. But you know, we've discussed this at Kirklees Schools Forum, and schools know that they can plan on the basis of the allocation that they will be receiving. In terms of how is this being spent? Well, one of the key things about the catch-up funding is it's absolutely down to individual schools to determine how best to spend that additional resource to best meet the needs of the youngsters in their school. There was lots of helpful information published for schools on the education endowment fund in terms of research-based opportunities that might support their thinking about how best to spend that. There's also, alongside this, there is a national tutoring programme, so that is set to complement what schools are able to do in terms of catch-up fund. And the DfE did publish, alongside the EF, a COVID-19 support guide for schools. In terms of we did, in terms of our governor briefing, obviously governors will be wanting to work with their school leaders about how best to use this additional funding. We had colleagues attend our governor briefing just earlier on in the autumn term, and it was really important that schools will be able to articulate how they're going to be spending the money and the rationale underpinning that. In terms of what we've been doing in terms of our Kirklees learning partners, our school improvement officers over the autumn term, we have been asking, as we've been doing virtual visits to schools, how that funding is being spent. And there's been a varied picture, but it's been quite early days. Schools have been asked to produce a plan for how they're spending catch-up, and they will have to be able to articulate the rationale, what the implementation is, and the impact. And that is something that we will continue to review as a team. But just to remind colleagues, there's not a uniform approach. It will be what's best for the youngsters that are in your school. But given that we're in January, it's really much too early for our governors or our school leaders to be able to measure or comment upon impact. So that is the update. I'm happy to answer questions, but I feel that this will be something that perhaps we could revisit with Scrutiny maybe later on in the academic year.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. Any questions or comments at this stage on the COVID catch-up fund? Paul White.
Thanks for that, Joanne, because I think this report might have come from a comment that I made about how schools were suddenly got this COVID catch-up fund, but no guidance and no idea of, what they were supposed to be spending it on. But in a sense, it's obvious what they were spending it on in terms of helping the, the pupils and students recover from being out of school for so many months. And I think there was an expectation at that time that there would be that school leaders would have to justify what they've spent it on and try and evidence the impact on the students of the actions that they've done. And of course, that's come in place since we spoke at the last panel. I think it's great that there has been this extra funding, but yet again, it's put another layer of pressure and stress on school leaders to sort of do another layer of work that they weren't expecting to do, wouldn't normally be expected to do. So I think it would be useful to have a roundup report just to see how schools have used this later on and what impact, if there is any way of measuring the impact that has had on students. So I'm aware of what has been done in schools locally to me, and we're having a governors meeting this evening to talk. It'll be one of the items that we'll be talking with our school leaders about. And I think they've been very creative and come up with some great ideas locally. So I think that will be included. But I'm aware that probably all schools are coming up with different plans, aren't they? So there will be some learning from it, perhaps for the future, in terms of the things that perhaps have had more impact than other things. So I've not really got a question. I said thanks very much for your report. It's something that we'll continue to monitor over the next few months. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Linda.
Thank you. It was something just prompted there by what Paul was saying, really, that sort of in summary, it's early stages really yet for us to know the impact, but just thinking that we don't though miss an opportunity to share what we're discovering about good practice, because everybody is sort of reinventing the wheel in a range of different ways, and that's great that they have the flexibility to do what's best for them. Equally, if somebody comes up with a good idea, we want to be able to spread that more widely as quickly as possible. So do the existing structures enable that to happen?
Shall I answer that? I think they do. As we lead a primary briefing for our primary colleagues, for example, and that opportunity for colleagues to say, this is how I'm using mine. Some of that is happening, that peer-to-peer support around some of the remote learning opportunities, and that's something we're absolutely encouraging, because where things are having a positive impact, it is a great opportunity, and definitely our secondary and special colleagues have that opportunity in their networks as well. But where we're seeing great practice and where it's coming out of any of our virtual visits to school, then absolutely encouraging that collaboration, because yes, there's additional funding to support this, but if there are some very helpful strategies, then again they will be able to be used possibly beyond this academic year. I think as well, one of the things that Ofsted are not currently inspecting schools in the way that they would normally, but what they are doing is some assurance visits, and I think part of the conversations they're looking to spot best practice, and I know to support schools, the Department for Education as well are trying to put case studies and good practice guides available to school leaders. I think it does, doesn't it, though? It comes back down to that, what's right for my cohort of youngsters, and it makes it maybe all the more challenging having to undertake remote learning again. But we know we've got fabulous people in our schools who are incredibly creative and resourceful, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Linda, for your question. Thanks, Joanne, for that response. I think it would be good. I mean, one of our key priorities is looking at educational outcomes, and I know we'd got, I think we put down that it would be good to see what the impact of COVID is over the longer term in terms of the educational outcomes for our children. We already saw, I know Linda made the contribution last year about the way that some of the GCSE grades were allocated, particularly larger institutions, and that had a direct impact on educational outcomes. But I think the COVID catch-up fund, it's it'd be interesting to know how that's working out over time, and just hoping it's not just a short term, so they might be using that fund at the moment, but actually how long does that additional funding need to be in place to make sure that long term, the outcomes for the children in our area are as good as they can be. And I think I'd be interested to know how it complements things like pupil premium and other additional resources we put in. Is there some overlap? Do we put that together? And I think it does go on your previous, the impact on children with special educational needs, and then I suppose that comes under the previous report as well. So if we can put that into our work program, I think we do just need to keep, we've got questions at the moment about a lot of these things, but we need a longer term view on it to see what the long term impacts are on educational outcomes. So, but thank you, Joanne. So if there are no other questions or comments, I think we'll move on to our last item, which is item 10, which is the work programme. I think it'd be good, Helen, if we could know, in terms of educational outcomes, we just do keep that, look at COVID impact, just include that in there under that umbrella. I don't think there's any other major changes to the work programme that we need to be looking at. Just a brief update on the lead member briefings. If members look at page 20, we've received a petition from St John's Church of England Junior School, and I'm keeping a watching brief on that. I know I've had an email through from one of the petitioners, and I'll be responding to that relatively shortly. So I don't know if anybody's got any other comments on the and the elective home education report did eventually get to Cabinet. Just to let panel members know, all the recommendations were accepted. I think it was particularly fascinating that a lot of parents are now becoming, not elective home educators, but are becoming home educators. And I think with a lot of things, you just hope that experience parents have of, their children's learning experience and supporting their learning experience, there might be, benefits that all of us learn about how we can do that, as well as possible. I think I've been volunteered as a family friend maths tutor at some stage, something to do with compound fractions, which is well within my. But it's all of this. I mean, it's difficult for everybody, but actually there's learning opportunities always. So, any other comments or questions on the work programme? No, fine, okay. Right, just before we finish, can I just think for Helen, just like I have actually received apologies, or I did receive apologies from Amanda Pinnock, who'd got emergency work today. So can we please make sure we record that in the minutes of the meeting? So I hope Amanda's managed to do that well today. So, okay. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance at today's meeting, for your questions, your comments, and for the contributions, and for those officers who've been leading on reports today. That's most appreciated. I think, can we as a panel express our thanks to all those members of staff who are continuing to work so hard for the children and young people in Kirklees, just to pass back where we can our appreciation for that and the hard work that's going on. And I suppose to express our thanks particularly to the staff in schools on a day like today, where it's been difficult to get into work, and I know a number of staff in our area have had to abandon their vehicles and walk home considerable distances, and just to thank them for their dedication, and thanks to parents as well. So our next meeting is on and it will be a virtual meeting. It's on the 25th of February in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. We look forward to joining us then. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye from this afternoon's meeting.